Thank you, Mr. Speaker. It's a privilege for me to stand in the House to explain the reasons for Canada's engagement in Afghanistan. It's certainly an honour to participate when we've had so many eloquent speakers, including our Minister of Defence and our Chief Government Whip and our Parliamentary Secretary of Defence, who have eloquently spoke about Canada's role in Afghanistan. The question we are debating today is not an easy one. I am sure all members of this House, regardless of their views on the mission, are fully conscious of the stakes. It is about the hopes and aspirations of millions of Afghans who yearn for a better future for themselves and for their families. It is about Canada's standing as a responsible member of the international community. And it is about one of the heaviest decisions any democratic government can be asked to consider, to send its men and women in harm's way to defend global security and promote Canadian values. If you ask me, there is no issue that is more critical than the one we are contemplating today. As parliamentarians, we have the duty to ensure every option is carefully weighed and given due consideration. That is why I welcome this opportunity, and I look forward to our discussions in the days ahead. To begin, let us start with what we can all agree on. The international community should not let Afghanistan fall back into the chaos and despair of the Taliban rule. I need not remind members of the House of the horror of the Taliban regime that held the reins of power in Afghanistan until 2001. They placed Afghans under a brutal regime of fear and intimidation. They persecuted women and girls. They destroyed schools, historical landmarks, and basic infrastructure. And they gave safe harbor to the terrorists who attacked our southern neighbor in September of 2001. I think we can all agree on this, Mr. Speaker. No one who believes in justice and human decency would condone the return of the Taliban. There is little doubt that the important work of our soldiers, diplomats, development officials, and government advisors is making a difference. Their efforts are creating the conditions that serve as a bulwark for preventing the return of the Taliban. Canadian Forces members are providing a secure environment for reconstruction and development to take place. Diplomats and development officials are working with local communities and organizations to find ways to improve governance, infrastructure, and government services. Police trainers and corrections advisors are on the ground helping the Afghan government develop the capacity to govern more effectively and ensure the respect of the rule of law. Their efforts are interconnected. Canada's approach recognizes that security, development, and governance are mutually reinforcing. You can't have one without the others. Mr. Speaker, as we all know, the going has not always been easy. Considerable challenges remain in Kandahar and across Afghanistan. However, I would urge all members to carefully consider the situation that prevailed in Afghanistan prior to the fall of the Taliban. Afghanistan has not been suffering from decades of conflict. Not only was there virtually no central government to speak of, but most of the country's vital infrastructure had been destroyed. Roads, wells, and irrigation canals were in rubble. Basic services such as healthcare and education were non-existent for the vast majority of Afghans. Even today, Afghanistan remains one of the poorest countries in the world. What must be borne in mind here is that the Afghans, figuratively speaking, are rebuilding their country from scratch. The mission is a difficult one, but it is in Afghanistan that the need is the greatest. Canadians are generous. We believe our nation has a role to play to alleviate suffering, improve living standards, and protect those who are vulnerable around the world. It has always been a Canadian motto that we're only as strong as our weakest link. Canada has demonstrated its sincere commitment to these values time and time again. You know, I think of my late great-uncle Frank Tascone, who was the president of the Barrie Legion on St. Vincent and Grenadines. He always spoke to me about the valor and the courage that Canadians showed throughout history in standing up for what's right. I know that a strong majority of Canadians are supportive of our development and reconstruction efforts, yet many harbor some misgivings about the more assertive military role our troops have been asked to play in Afghanistan. That is understandable. If there is a common thread in the Canadian tradition, it is the premium our nation has placed on finding common ground, our willingness to exhaust all options before resorting to force. Indeed, our reluctance to take up arms is a virtue. Yet when the cause is just and the sacrifice necessary, Canada has always answered the call. As the Manley Report recently observed, humanitarian disasters in places like Bosnia and Rwanda have led United Nations mandated peace missions to increasingly rely on the robust use of force to protect those who are vulnerable. The drafters of the United Nations Charter having just emerged from the most devastating war of the 20th century, had envisioned such situations. That is why they included a reference in Chapter 7 of the Charter, and they penned it. It states the Security Council may take such action by air, sea, or land forces as may be necessary to maintain or restore international peace and security. Mr. Speaker, the ISAF mission in Afghanistan is entirely in line with the spirit of the UN Charter. The fact of the matter is the NATO-led International Security Assistance Force mission is mandated by the United Nations. Last November, the UN Security Council renewed once again the ISAF's mandate. Our government does not believe that Canada should say to the people of Afghanistan, we are willing to help you, but only if your plight fits the peacekeeping mold. If the going gets tough, I'm afraid there isn't much we can do for you. That is not the Canadian way. Afghans have suffered through decades of conflict and poverty. With our help, they are getting back on their feet. To turn our backs at this point would jeopardize much of what has been achieved up to now, and it would reflect poorly on Canada's willingness to see its commitment through. There is a strong agreement in the international community that the Afghan mission is important, that it cannot be allowed to fail. We are part of this mission with 39 other nations. Many others, such as Japan and India, are providing much-needed development assistance. Certainly, it's in the finest traditions of multilateralism, as echoed in history through Canada with Lester Pearson as he spoke loudly on the international stage about the importance of multilateralism. Well, this is a perfect case of that. Canada is playing a leading role in this critical international endeavor. The burden we have carried in Kandahar is a heavy one. But Afghans and the international community are thankful for Canada's commitment and determination. Mr. Speaker, our government does not believe Canada should abandon the people of Afghanistan after February of 2009. To that end, we issued a revised motion on the future of Afghanistan mission on February 21st. The motion reflects the wise counsel of the Manley panel. It embraces an even wider expanse of the common ground than before. It commits our government to notify NATO that Canada will end its presence in Kandahar as of July 2011, completing redeployment from the south by December of that year. More importantly, it acknowledges what is required for Canada's mission to succeed in Afghanistan. It states two important conditions for the mission to be extended. First, the NATO secure a battle group of approximately 1,000 to rotate into Kandahar no later than February 2009. Second, that the government secure medium helicopter lift capacity and high-performance unmanned aerial vehicles. Mr. Speaker, we believe this is a reasonable compromise that addresses the important questions Canadians have about the future of the mission. And it will give our brave men and women the means to succeed. As the Prime Minister has stated, it is a clear and principled position. We urge all members of the House to carefully consider their vote on this issue. It has profound implications for Canada's international reputation, for the Canadian men and women who are bravely putting their lives on the line in Afghanistan, and for the millions of Afghans who are looking to us for support as they strive to rebuild their country. Mr. Speaker, I believe the choice is clear, and this government has taken the correct position. You know, I look at my own riding in Barrie, Ontario, and it's been amazing to see some of the support that the community has shown for the mission and for our troops. You know, I think of the Red Friday rally at Fred Grant Square, where it was packed and you couldn't even move because there was that much support for our troops and for the mission in Afghanistan. You know, I think of the Support Our Troops T-shirts that were sold at the Barrie Legion by Royden Johnson, and at the Army Navy Club by Dick Howie and Neil McKinnon, and the work they did in supporting our troops was remarkable. But what was even more remarkable was those shirts sold out within days, because Canadians were excited and enthused to stand up for what's right, and what is right is the Canadian mission in Afghanistan. It is playing that multilateral role. It is continuing the role that Canada has always showed throughout history. So it is a pleasure to stand in this House today to support the Canadian position in Afghanistan. And Mr. Speaker, I appreciate the opportunity to do so today.
The honourable member for Burnaby, New Westminster, has the floor under questions and comments.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I listened with interest the presentation of the Conservative member. He said the Canadian position. But, Mr. Speaker, what has been very clear is Canadians have expressed their view on the mission in Afghanistan, most recent polling shows that 85% of Canadians believe that our mission should be ending within the year in Afghanistan. So the Canadian position, as expressed by Canadians from coast to coast to coast, is in line with the NDP position, not in line with the Conservative government position. So the member can't say it's the Canadian position. It is the position of this Conservative government to stay in Afghanistan regardless of what is actually going on the ground there. So that's the point I'd like to make, but the questions I'd like to ask are the following. Now, he's heard evidence tonight of the $18 billion that has mainly gone into back pockets of the warlords and drug lords in the Afghani government. He's heard evidence as well from Malalai Joya, who is a member of parliament who's been muzzled in the Afghani parliament, but who has said that after 6 years in control, this government has proven itself to be as bad as the Taliban. In fact, it is little more than a photocopy of the Taliban. The situation in Afghanistan is getting progressively worse, and not just for women, but for all Afghans. In fact, she says in 2007, more women killed themselves in Afghanistan than ever before. It shows that the situation hasn't improved. Now, the government members tonight have basically had two lines. One is, we've got to continue because that's our position, regardless of what is actually going on the ground. And then secondly, they've said, well, the situation of the women in Afghanistan is something that concerns us. Yet, the fact that the Afghani government has not improved the situation of women in Afghanistan at all, that most marriages are still forced, that rape and murder are commonplace in Afghani government-controlled areas, does not seem to have any impact on Conservative members. So my question is quite simple. Why do members of the Conservative Party simply refuse to, at any point, criticize the Afghani government for the widespread violations of human rights, for the abuse of women, and for the widespread corruption in Afghanistan?
The honourable member for Barron.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Certainly it's difficult to comment on anecdotal evidence that's more based on myth than reality, but I would say, you know, if there's a reason to be in Afghanistan alone, you simply look at the fact that when the Taliban ruled the day, females were not allowed to vote, let alone sit in parliament, and that is happening today in Afghanistan. But I'd like to point to some of the more reasons that I think a lot of Canadians are very proud of the mission. And I'll give you some examples of why we're so proud. Close to 6 million children, 1/3 of them girls, enrolled in school in 2007-2008. Or the per capita income has doubled between 2004 and 2007. Or how about the fact 83% of Afghans now have access to basic medical care? It was 9% in 2004. Now, these aren't anecdotal points. These are facts. These are facts about the success in Afghanistan. Or how about the fact that Canadians directly support the vaccination of more than 7 million children against polio, including approximately 350,000 in Kandahar province? Another fact, not anecdotal point based on myth or rumor, more than 10 million Afghans registered to vote in free and fair elections. 347 women were candidates. It's a testament to the accomplishment of what has happened in Afghanistan. We are seeing a country that is rebuilding from scratch, a country that was in such a weak position when the Taliban ruled the day with a heavy hand. It was such depravity that it was a situation where they allowed a country to harbor terrorists. I could not imagine a political party that supported that status quo. And it's certainly an honor to support the position of this Minister of Defence and this government and our Prime Minister that Canada has a role to play in Afghanistan in the multilateral way that we are.
Questions and comments? The honourable member for Blackstrap.
Thank you. Thank you. I would just like to. I have this letter that I would like to put on record, and I'd like the honourable member's comment, because I'd like to have, for those who are listening, to understand that I don't think this the terror has any borders. And the letter talks about Afghan pleads for Canadian help. It's from Dr. Bashir Ahmad, a medical intern from the Heritage University in Afghanistan. And he says, Afghanistan is my home, and it's a bitter reality to me, but we need external assistance to keep our country peaceful. People here are worried about the rumors that international forces are planning to leave Afghanistan. If international forces leave, the future for us Afghans will go as well. There is hope in Afghanistan, but this hope depends on how strong the international commitment is. The involvement of the international community, including Canada, means more peace and security here. Will the rest of the world be safe if Afghanistan is left in the hands of destructive forces? Our enemies do not recognize borders. If they win in Afghanistan, they will turn it into a base to attack the rest of the world. So continued international commitment in Afghanistan is something that must be done for the sake of a more secure and a peaceful world. I'd like the member to comment.
The honourable member for Barrie.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And certainly that letter, eloquently read by my colleague from Blackstrap, speaks to the reason why we need to be in Afghanistan. It is the Afghan people that are calling for help. It is Afghanistan that we are listening to. It is that country that is in need and that is looking to the world for leadership, and Canada has answered that call along with 39 other countries who have said that we have a role to play in standing up for what is right there. So I think it's certainly appropriate that the member for Blackstrap read that letter out. And it's also certainly interesting to note, Mr. Speaker, that as we discuss Afghanistan here today, and when I look at this chamber, there is Conservative members who are eager to participate and express support for this, and hopefully we'll see those that object to the mission show up as well.
Questions and comments? Questions et commentaires?